The first-class cabin hummed with a particular kind of silence, the expensive kind. Soft amber light pooled over leather seats the color of burnt caramel. Crystal glasses caught the glow from overhead reading lamps. Outside the oval windows, the tarmac of Denver International Airport stretched dark and endless beneath the October sky. Flight 412 to Boston. Red-eye departure. 11:45 p.m. Most passengers had already settled in. A woman in 1D scrolled through her tablet, diamond earrings catching light with every small movement. Across the aisle, a man in his 50s adjusted his cashmere scarf and closed his eyes. The cabin smelled faintly of vanilla and new magazines. Terrence Shaw placed his briefcase beneath seat 3A Italian leather, hand-stitched, the kind that came with a story and a price tag most people would wince at. He straightened, about to sit, when a voice stopped him cold. "Excuse me, sir." The flight attendant stood close enough that he could read her name. Tag. Claire Morrison. Mid-30s, blonde hair pulled tight in a bun, lipstick the shade of authority. Her smile was pleasant, professional, and it didn't reach her eyes. "May I see your boarding pass?" Terrence blinked once, slowly. He'd been flying first class for 15 years. Nobody ever asked to see his boarding pass after he'd already boarded. Still, he reached into his jacket pocket. Navy wool, tailored in Milan, fitted perfectly across his shoulders. He handed her the paper without a word. Claire studied it, longer than necessary. Her eyes flicked from the seat number to his face, then back again. "And your name is—" "Terrence Shaw." She tilted her head slightly. "This is a first-class ticket." "I'm aware." "And you purchased this yourself?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Around them, other passengers had started to notice. The man in 3C glanced up from his Wall Street Journal. The woman across the aisle paused mid-sip of champagne. Terrence kept his voice even, calm. "I booked it 3 weeks ago through the airline's website. Confirmation number's right there." Claire didn't look at the confirmation number. "I'll need to verify something with my supervisor. Please wait here." She turned and walked toward the galley without offering him water, a drink menu, or even a second glance. Terrence stood there, 6'2", Harvard Law graduate, 58 years old, founder and CEO of Vanguard Solutions, a consulting firm that had just closed a $250 million merger 2 months prior. He'd been profiled in Bloomberg Businessweek. He sat on the board of 3 nonprofits. He owned property in 2 states. And he was a black man standing in first class, which apparently tonight was a problem. 2 rows back, someone whispered. He didn't catch the words, but he caught the tone. Suspicion wrapped in curiosity wrapped in something uglier. He thought about his father, Samuel Shaw, mechanic, veteran, a man who'd raised 3 sons, in South Memphis on a paycheck that never stretched far enough, but somehow always covered what mattered. His father used to say, "They'll test you everywhere you go, son. Don't give them a reason, but don't you ever shrink either." Terrence had never shrunk, not once. Before we go deeper into this case, take a second and hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and let us know where you're watching from. I'm curious to know how far these stories travel. Claire returned. This time she had company. A second attendant, younger, nervous-looking, stood just behind her. Claire's smile had thinned. "Sir, there's been a seating issue." Terrence raised an eyebrow. "What kind of issue?" "We may need to relocate you temporarily." "Relocate me." He said it slowly, tasting every syllable. It's standard procedure when VIP passengers board late. "I am a VIP passenger. I paid $5,200 for this seat." Claire's tone shifted. "Just a fraction. Just enough. I understand, sir, but I'm going to need your cooperation." That word, cooperation. It sounded polite. It wasn't. Terrence reached for his phone, pulled up his email. Here's my confirmation. Seat 3A Vanguard Airlines Flight 412. Booked under Terrence R. Shaw. Claire didn't even glance at the screen. Please remain seated. Someone will be with you shortly. She walked away, and she didn't bring him the welcome drink she'd just handed to the white man in 3C. Terrence exhaled, slowly. He adjusted the cuff of his shirt, Egyptian cotton, monogrammed, spotless, and sat back down. He didn't look around, didn't need to. He could feel the stairs like weight pressing against his shoulders. The intercom crackled. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be closing the cabin door in approximately 10 minutes. Please ensure all carry-on items are stowed and seatbelts are fastened. Terrence stared straight ahead. Then footsteps. Quick, confident, expensive shoes on polished flooring. A man appeared in the aisle. Tall, maybe 30. Tailored charcoal suit, gold cufflinks, platinum frequent flyer tag, hanging from his carry-on like a badge. He stopped next to Claire, who had reappeared near the galley. "Excuse me," the man said, voice sharp with entitlement. "I always sit in 3A. Why is someone in my seat?" Claire nodded once, as if they'd rehearsed this. "We're handling it, Mr. Caldwell." Caldwell. Terrence knew the name. Everyone did. Preston Caldwell III, son of a Massachusetts governor, venture capitalist, regular feature in society pages and political donor lists, the kind of man who believed the world owed him courtesy simply for existing. Preston looked past Claire, directly at Terrence. His lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Can we speed this up? I don't fly coach." Claire turned back to Terrence. Now a third attendant had joined her. A man this time. Tall, expressionless. "I'm sorry, sir," Claire said. Her voice had lost even the pretense of warmth. "But we're going to need to reassign your seat. Please gather your belongings." Terrence stared at her. "On what grounds?" "Security protocol." He let the word settle. Security protocol. The kind of phrase that sounded official. The kind of phrase that meant nothing and everything at the same time. He glanced past her. The man in 3C was leaning forward now, pretending not to watch, but clearly watching. A woman across the aisle had pulled out her phone. She wasn't even trying to hide it. The screen was angled directly at him. Terrence took a long breath. This wasn't about a seat. This was about something older, something deeper, something that had followed him from childhood to courtrooms to boardrooms to here, 35,000 feet above the ground, in a cabin that cost more per hour than most people earned in a week. And for now, he chose silence. He stood, slowly, deliberately, picked up his briefcase, and without a word, he began walking toward the back of the plane. Behind him, Preston Caldwell slid into seat 3A like he owned it. Behind him, champagne glasses clinked. Behind him, people looked away. The overhead bin snapped shut above Terrence's head. Row 29, middle seat, economy. To his left, a man who smelled like stale coffee and too much cologne. To his right, a teenager with headphones blasting music loud enough that Terrence could hear the bass from 2 feet away. The armrest dug into his sides. There was no legroom. The seat reclined maybe 2 inches. He didn't complain. He never did. But inside, something cracked. Terrence Shaw, 58 years old, Harvard Law School, class of '92, founder and CEO of Vanguard Solutions, a consulting firm managing over $300 million in client portfolios. Named by Forbes as one of the top 25 black executives reshaping American business. Mentor to 43 minority entrepreneurs through his nonprofit foundation. Board member at 2 Fortune 500 companies. Tonight, he was a black man squeezed into economy for no reason. After paying $5,000 for a seat he'd reserved weeks in advance. The same Terrence Shaw who was flying to finalize a $95 million investment deal with Vanguard Airlines. He looked down at his wrist. His father's watch. A Timex from the 80s. Simple. Functional. Still ticking after all these years. 9:51 p.m. He closed his eyes and let his mind drift back. Memphis, Tennessee, 1978. Terrence was 10 years old the first time someone told him he didn't belong. It was a Saturday afternoon. His mother, Dorothy Shaw, had taken him and his brothers downtown to Goldsmith's department store. She'd saved up for months to buy them school clothes. Terrence remembered the way she walked, head high, purse clutched tight, her Sunday dress pressed crisp even though it was a weekday. They'd made it to the second floor. Boys section. Terrence was looking at a blue jacket with brass buttons when a day store manager approached. "Can I help you find something?" His mother smiled. "We're just browsing, thank you." The manager didn't leave. "This section is for customers making purchases." "I am a customer," Dorothy said quietly. "Well, we don't want any trouble." Terrence had looked up then. He didn't understand. His mother had money. She had a list. She had every right to be there. But the manager's eyes told a different story. They left without buying anything. On the bus ride home, his mother didn't cry. She just stared out the window, jaw tight. When they got home, she sat Terrence down at the kitchen table. "Baby," she said, "the world's going to test you. Not because of who you are, because of what you look like. You're going to have to be twice as good, twice as prepared, twice as calm. And even then, some folks still won't see you." "That's not fair," Terrence had whispered. "No," she agreed. "It's not. But fairness and reality don't always shake hands." Now 46. Years later, Terrence was in row 29 of an airplane, staring at the seat in front of him, hearing his mother's voice like she was sitting right there. Twice as good, twice as prepared, and still. The plane's engines rumbled to life. The cabin lights dimmed. Around him, passengers settled into that pre-flight hush. Phones going into airplane mode, blankets pulled up, eyes closing. Terrence pulled out his laptop, opened a folder labeled Vanguard Airlines, Aurora Aviation Merger Proposal, $95 million. That's what his firm was about to invest in Vanguard Airline's new subsidiary, Aurora Aviation, a fleet modernization project that would expand routes into underserved markets across the Midwest. It was the kind of deal that made headlines, the kind that opened doors, the kind that proved, once again, that Terrence Shaw wasn't just good at what he did. He was the best. But tonight, none of that mattered. Tonight, he was just another black man told to move, to the back. He scrolled through the contract. Every clause, every figure, every contingency he'd spent months negotiating. His team, brilliant, relentless, had worked 16-hour days to get this right. The deal was set to close in 72 hours. And Vanguard Airlines had just humiliated him in front of a cabin full of witnesses. Terrence stared at the screen. Then slowly he began typing an email. Subject: Flight 412, incident, immediate response required. To Patricia Nguyen, General Counsel, Vanguard Airlines. CC Samuel Torres, COO. Aisha Grant, VP of Equity and Inclusion. He wrote carefully, precisely. No emotion, just facts. Dear Ms. Nguyen, I am writing to formally document an incident that occurred aboard Flight 412 on October 14th. At approximately 9:40 p.m., I was removed from my assigned first-class seat, 3A, and relocated to economy without cause, explanation, or refund. I was informed this was due to security protocol and VIP passenger priority. I was given no opportunity to dispute this decision. The seat I had paid $5,200 for was reassigned to another passenger who boarded after me. I am attaching my booking confirmation, payment receipt, and boarding pass for your review. As you may be aware, I am scheduled to finalize a $95 million investment in Aurora Aviation on October 17th. I trust you understand the gravity of how this incident reflects on Vanguard Airline's values and operational practices. I will be available to discuss this matter upon arrival in Boston. Respectfully, Terrence Shaw, CEO, Vanguard Solutions. He read it twice, then hit send. The email disappeared into the digital ether. Terrence closed his laptop, leaned his head back, and waited. Boston Logan International Airport, 6:47 a.m. The plane touched down with a jolt. Passengers stirred, yawned, reached for their bags. Terrence stayed seated until the aisle cleared. No point rushing. He'd spent 6 hours crammed into a seat that felt like punishment. When he finally stood, his back ached. His knees protested. He grabbed his briefcase and walked toward the exit, moving past first class without looking. The flight attendant stood near the door, smiling, thanking passengers. Claire Morrison was among them. When Terrence passed, she didn't make eye contact. He stepped off the plane into the jetway, pulled out his phone. 3 missed calls, 7 emails. The first email was from Patricia Nguyen. Subject, RA. Flight 412. Incident. Immediate response required. Mr. Shaw, thank you for bringing this to our attention. We take all passenger concerns seriously and are reviewing the matter internally. Someone from our customer relations team will be in touch within 24 to 48 hours. Best regards, Patricia Nguyen. Terrence read it twice. 24 to 48 hours. Standard corporate delay tactic. Acknowledge the complaint. Promise a review. Hope the person gets tired and goes away. He deleted the email. The second email was from his COO, Janelle Brooks. Subject, are you okay? Boss, just saw your email. What happened? Do we need to pull the deal? Call me when you land. J. Terrence typed back quickly. Landed. I'm fine. Don't pull anything yet. Let's see how they respond. The third email was from someone he didn't recognize. Subject, you're not alone. Mr. Shaw, my name is Angela Martinez. I'm a flight attendant with Vanguard Airlines, though not on Flight 412. I heard about what happened to you through internal channels. This isn't the first time. There's a pattern. If you're willing to listen, I have information that might help. Please let me know if you'd like to talk. Angela. Terrence stopped walking, read the email again. There's a pattern. He stood there in the middle of the terminal, travelers flowing around him like water around a stone. Then he replied, Ms. Martinez, I'm listening. Let's meet. They met in a quiet corner of a coffee shop in downtown Boston, the kind of place that smelled like espresso and old books. Angela Martinez arrived 10 minutes early, hands wrapped around a mug of black coffee, eyes darting toward the door every few seconds. When Terrence walked in, she stood immediately. Mr. Shaw, thank you for meeting me. He shook her hand. Call me Terrence. They sat. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Angela pulled a manila folder from her bag, slid it across the table. I've been with Vanguard for 9 years, she said quietly. I love my job. I love the people I work with. But there's something happening, something I can't ignore anymore. Terrence opened the folder. Inside were printouts, emails, internal memos, flight logs, all marked confidential, internal use only. The first document was a policy directive dated March 2021. Subject, Premium Cabin Guest Experience Enhancement Protocol. It outlined procedures for managing passenger expectations in first class. The language was careful, precise, but between the lines, the meaning was clear. Flight attendants are authorized to reassign passengers in premium cabins if their presence is deemed inconsistent with the expected guest experience. Inconsistent. Terrence read it again. What does that mean? He asked. Angela's jaw tightened. It means if you don't look like you belong, They can move you. Based on what criteria? That's the thing. There are no criteria. It's subjective. It's up to the crew's discretion. Terrence flipped to the next page. A spreadsheet. Names, dates, flight numbers, seat reassignments. 43 cases in the last 2 years. 37 of them were passengers of color. He felt something cold settle in his chest. How did you get this? Angela looked down. I started keeping track after I saw it happen 3 times in 1 month. Always the same excuse. VIP passenger priority. Security concern. Overbooking error. But it was always the same type of passenger being moved. And you reported this? Twice. Both times I was told it was being handled internally. Nothing changed. Terrence closed the folder, looked at her. Why are you showing me this? Because you have power, Angela said. You have resources. You have a voice people will listen to. I don't. If I go public, I lose my job, my career, everything. But you, she paused. You can make them answer for this. Before we continue, take a second and share your thoughts so far on this story below. I read every single one. Terrence sat back, stared at the folder. $95 million. That's what was on the table. That's what his firm stood to gain. That's what months of work had built toward. But this folder represented something bigger. He thought about his mother, about that department store in Memphis, about every time he'd been stopped, questioned, doubted, tested, about every time he'd stayed silent because fighting back felt too costly. Not this time. He looked at Angela. Can you get me more documentation? She nodded. I'll get you everything. Good, Terrence said, because we're not just filing a complaint. We're going to expose the whole system. Over the next 48 hours, Angela delivered. She sent encrypted files, scanned documents, audio recordings from crew briefings, screenshots of internal chat messages. Every piece of evidence meticulously dated, sourced, verified. Terrence sat in his hotel suite, laptop open, files spread across the desk like pieces of a puzzle he was finally starting to see. There were patterns everywhere. Passengers removed from first class. 43 documented cases. Passengers removed from business class. 67 cases. Passengers flagged for additional screening at the gate. 112 cases. The vast majority? Black, Latino, Middle Eastern, South Asian. The reasons given? Vague. Shifting. Always just plausible enough to avoid scrutiny. Overbooking. Last-minute VIP accommodation. Suspicious. Behavior. Dress code violation. That last one stood out. Terrence clicked on the case file. A man named David Chen. Removed from business class on a flight from Seattle to Atlanta. Reason. Inappropriate attire. He'd been wearing jeans and a hoodie. The passenger who took his seat. A white woman in yoga pants and a tank top. Terrence leaned back in his chair. Rubbed his eyes. His phone buzzed. A text from Janelle. Meeting with Vanguard execs tomorrow at 10 a.m. They want to discuss your concerns. Should I tell them you're bringing a lawyer? Terrence thought about it, then texted back. No lawyer. Not yet. Let them think this is just about me. Janelle replied immediately. You sure? This feels like a setup. It is. But I need to see how far they'll go to protect themselves. Be careful, boss. Always. Terrence set the phone down. Looked at the files again. Tomorrow, he'd sit across from Vanguard's executives. They'd offer an apology. Maybe a voucher. Maybe a promise. To investigate further. They'd smile, shake his hand, and hope he'd walk away quietly. They didn't know what he knew. They didn't know what he was planning. Vanguard Airline's corporate headquarters. Boston, Massachusetts, 10 a.m. The conference room was all glass and steel. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. A table that could seat 20. Leather chairs. A coffee station with porcelain cups and fresh pastries nobody touched. Terrence arrived alone. No lawyer, no assistant. Just him, his briefcase, and a calm that came from knowing exactly what he was walking into. Patricia Nguyen stood when he entered. Mid-40s, sharp suit, handshake firm enough to mean business, but not quite warm. "Mr. Shaw, thank you for coming. Miss Nguyen," she gestured to the table. "Please sit. Can I get you anything? Coffee? Water?" "I'm fine." 3 other executives filed in. Samuel Torres, COO, Michelle Blanchard, VP of Customer Experience, and someone Terrence hadn't expected, Richard Hammond, CEO of Vanguard Airlines. Hammond extended his hand. "Terrence, I wanted to be here personally to address your concerns." They sat. Patricia opened a folder. "We've completed our internal review of Flight 412. I want to start by saying we deeply regret any inconvenience you experienced." Terrence said nothing. She continued. "Our records show that there was a miscommunication between the gate agent and the flight crew regarding seat assignments. When Mr. Caldwell boarded, there was confusion about whether his seat had been properly reserved. The crew made a judgment call to accommodate him temporarily while they sorted it out." "Temporarily," Terrence repeated. "Yes." "For 6 hours." Patricia hesitated. Unfortunately, by the time the situation was clarified, the flight was already in the air. "And you didn't think to move Mr. Caldwell to economy?" Silence. Michelle Blanchard spoke up. "Mr. Caldwell is a Platinum Elite member, our highest tier. We have protocols in place to ensure those passengers receive priority service." "I see," Terrence said. "And what tier was I?" "You were Gold status." "Gold, which I earned by flying over 100,000 miles with your airline last year. We value your loyalty." "Do you?" Terrence's voice was quiet, steady. "Because from where I'm sitting, it seems like my loyalty is worth less than his last name." Richard Hammond cleared his throat. "Terrence, I understand you're upset. We're prepared to offer you a full refund for your ticket, plus 50,000 bonus miles and an upgrade voucher for your next 10 flights." Terrence looked at him. Then he opened his briefcase, pulled out the folder Angela had given him, set it on the table. "That's generous," Terrence said, "but I'm not here for miles." Patricia glanced at the folder. "What is this?" "Documentation," Terrence said, "of a pattern. 43 passengers removed from first class in the last 2 years, 67 from business class, over 100 flagged for additional screening. Would you like to guess what they all have in common?" The room went very quiet. Samuel Torres leaned forward. "Mr. Shaw, I don't know where you're getting your information, but I have names, dates, flight numbers, internal memos, audio recordings." Terrence's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "I have everything." Richard Hammond's face had gone pale. "This is a serious accusation," Patricia said carefully. "It's not an accusation," Terrence replied. "It's a fact. And unless you're prepared to address it, I'm going to make sure every journalist, every regulator, and every civil rights organization in this country knows about it." Michelle Blanchard's hands were shaking. "We have diversity initiatives." "You have a policy," Terrence cut her off, "that allows crew members to remove passengers from premium cabins based on subjective judgments about who belongs there. You have internal communications that use coded language to justify racial profiling. And you have a CEO who just offered me miles to keep quiet about it." He stood. "I'm not interested in miles. I'm interested in accountability." Richard Hammond stood too. "What do you want?" Terrence looked at him. "I want the policy eliminated. I want an independent audit of every passenger reassignment in the last 5 years. I want compensation for every person who was wrongfully removed. And I want it on record, publicly. That could take months." "You have 72 hours, Terrence said. "That's when our investment deal closes." If I don't see meaningful action by then, I'm pulling the $95 million, and I'm going public with everything I have." He picked up his briefcase. "Gentlemen, Ms. Nien, Ms. Blanchard, you have my email." Then he walked out. The news broke 6 hours later. Not because Terrence leaked it, because someone else did. A flight attendant named Marcus Green posted a video on social media, 3 minutes long, filmed on his phone in the crew lounge at Denver International Airport. He talked about the policies, the training, the unspoken rules. "They tell us to prioritize the guest experience," Marcus said, staring into the camera. "But what they really mean is, make sure the cabin looks right. Make sure the people in first class look like they belong there. And if someone doesn't fit that image, we're supposed to fix it, quietly, professionally, without making a scene." The video went viral in under 2 hours. By midnight, it had 3 million views. By morning, journalists were calling, and Vanguard Airline stock had dropped 4%. Terrence's phone rang at 7 a.m. Richard Hammond. "We need to talk." "I'm listening." "Can we meet today?" "Same place, noon." "I'll be there." Terrence hung up. He poured himself coffee, black, hot, sat by the window and watched the city wake up. Somewhere out there, people were reading Marcus's story, sharing it, connecting dots, asking questions. And for the first time in 2 days, Terrence allowed himself a small, quiet smile. Noon, same conference room. This time the executives looked different, less polished, more rattled. Richard Hammond sat down heavily. "I've been on the phone with our board all morning." "I'm sure you have," Terrence said. "They want this resolved, quickly." "Good." Patricia Nguyen slid a document across the table. "We're prepared to meet your demands." Terrence picked it up, scanned the pages. Policy Revision Proposal. Immediate Actions. Asterisk suspension of premium cabin. Guest Experience Enhancement Protocol, effective immediately. Independent third-party audit of all passenger reassignments from 2020 to present. Establishment of a $10 million compensation fund for affected passengers. Long-term actions. Creation of a passenger rights oversight board with external representation. Mandatory implicit bias. Training for all flight crews and gate agents. Quarterly diversity and inclusion reporting to be made publicly available. Terrence set the document down. "This is a start." "A start?" Michelle Blanchard's voice cracked slightly. "This is everything you asked for." "No," Terrence said. "It's everything I asked for initially. But the situation has changed." Richard Hammond's jaw tightened. "What do you mean?" "You waited until you had no choice. You waited until the story went public. You waited until your stock started falling. That tells me you're not interested in doing the right thing. You're interested in damage control. That's not fair." "Fair?" Terrence's voice remained calm, dangerously calm. "You want to talk about fair? Let me tell you what's fair. Fair would have been Claire Morrison asking Preston Caldwell to wait while she verified his seat assignment. Fair would have been offering me a drink before interrogating me. Fair would have been treating me like a human being instead of a problem to be managed." Silence. "Here's what's going to happen," Terrence continued. "You're going to implement every item on this list. You're going to issue a public apology. Not a statement, not a press release. A real apology from you, Mr. Hammond, on camera. And you're going to do it within 48 hours. "And if we do all that," Patricia asked, "then we'll talk about the investment deal." Richard Hammond stood. "This is extortion." "No," Terrence said. "This is accountability. You can call it whatever you want, but those are my terms." He walked to the door, stopped, turned back. "One more thing. Claire Morrison, the flight attendant who removed me from 3A. I want her statement on record. I want to know if she was following orders or acting on her own." That's an HR matter. Make it a public matter, Terrence said. Transparency, Mr. Hammond. That's the price of my trust. Then he left. Before we go deeper, I would love to hear your point of view. Tell me what part hit you the hardest in the story and share your thoughts in the comments. The apology came 36 hours later. Not in a conference room, not in a carefully worded email, but in front of cameras, microphones, and a room full of journalists who smelled blood in the water. Vanguard Airlines called a press conference. 2 p.m. Boston, their corporate headquarters lobby hastily converted into a media circus. Terrence watched from his hotel room, laptop open, live stream playing. Richard Hammond stood at a podium. Behind him, Patricia Nguyen and Michelle Blanchard, both looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. To the side, partially visible, Claire Morrison, the flight attendant who'd removed him from seat 3A. Hammond cleared his throat, adjusted his tie, looked directly into the camera. Good afternoon. I'm here today to address a serious matter that has come to light regarding Vanguard Airlines' treatment of passengers, specifically incidents involving the removal of paying customers from premium cabins without adequate cause or explanation. He paused. We have reviewed internal policies and procedures. We have examined documented cases. And I am here to say, without qualification, that we failed. We failed our passengers. We failed our values. And we failed the trust that travelers place in us every day. The room was silent, except for the click of cameras. I want to specifically address Mr. Terrence Shaw, who was removed from his first-class seat on Flight 412. Mr. Shaw, you were treated unfairly. You were treated with disrespect. And for that, I apologize. Not as a CEO protecting a brand, but as a human being who recognizes that what happened to you was wrong. Hammond's voice wavered slightly. We are immediately suspending the policy that allowed this to happen. We are launching an independent audit of every passenger reassignment over the past 5 years. We are establishing a compensation fund for those who were wrongfully affected. And we are committing to transparency in all future diversity and inclusion efforts. He looked down at his notes, then up again. This is not about public relations. This is about doing what is right. And I promise you, we will do better. The press erupted with questions. Mr. Hammond, how many passengers were affected? Is this policy racist? Will there be criminal charges? What about the employees who carried out these removals? Hammond held up a hand. We will answer all questions in time. But right now, I want to turn the microphone over to someone who has shown tremendous courage in bringing this issue forward. He stepped aside. Claire Morrison approached the podium. She looked smaller than Terrence remembered, pale, shaken. My name is Claire Morrison, she said, voice barely above a whisper. I've been a flight attendant with Vanguard Airlines for 8 years, and I was the crew member who removed Mr. Shaw from his seat. She took a breath. I was following protocol. At least that's what I told myself. We were trained to prioritize certain passengers, to manage the guest experience in premium cabins. And when Mr. Caldwell boarded and expressed frustration, I made a choice. I chose to accommodate him instead of defending Mr. Shaw's right to the seat he paid for. Her voice cracked. I didn't think of it as discrimination. I thought of it as customer service. But I was wrong. I was part of a system that allowed bias to masquerade as policy. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry to Mr. Shaw. I'm sorry to every passenger who experienced this. And I'm sorry to my colleagues who were put in impossible positions by these policies. She stepped back, and then quietly, she started crying. Terrence closed his laptop. He sat there for a long moment, staring at the blank screen. Part of him felt vindicated. Part of him felt exhausted. And part of him felt something he hadn't expected, pity. Not for Hammond, not for the executives who'd built the system, but for Claire. For Angela. For every employee who'd been caught between their conscience and their paycheck. His phone buzzed. A text from Janelle. They did it. Public apology. Policy change. Everything. Do we move forward with the deal? Terrence stared at the message. $95 million. He could walk away. Take the moral high ground, prove a point. Or he could stay. Use the leverage he'd gained. Make sure the changes weren't just performative, he typed back. Schedule a meeting. I want to see the audit results first. And I want a seat on their diversity board, Janelle replied immediately. You want to work with them after all this? I want to make sure they follow through. The only way to do that is from the inside. Understood. I'll set it up. Terrence set the phone down. Then he opened his email. There was a message from Angela Martinez. Subject: Thank you, Mr. Shaw. I watched the press conference. I can't believe it actually happened. Real change. Real accountability. I know this cost you something. It cost all of us something. But you didn't back down. And because of that, maybe the next person who looks like you, or me, won't have to fight this battle alone. Thank you. Angela Terrence read it twice. Then he stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the city. Somewhere down there, people were talking, sharing the story, debating the policies, asking hard questions about systems they'd never questioned before. And for the first time in days, Terrence felt something other than anger. He felt hope. 1 week later, the independent audit was complete. Terrence sat in the same conference room where this had all started. This time the table was crowded. Richard Hammond, Patricia Nguyen, Samuel Torres, 3 members of Vanguard's board, 2 attorneys, and Dr. Marcus Freeman, the civil rights consultant hired to conduct the audit. Dr. Freeman stood at the front of the room, slides projected on the screen behind him. Let me start with the findings, he said, voice steady and clinical. Over the past 5 years, Vanguard Airlines processed approximately 217 passenger reassignments from premium cabins. Of those, 143, nearly 66%, involved passengers of color. He clicked to the next slide. A graph. Red bars climbing higher than blue ones. When we controlled for variables like ticket class, loyalty status, and boarding time, the disparity became even more pronounced. Black passengers were 3 times more likely to be reassigned than white passengers with identical booking profiles. Latino passengers were twice as likely. Asian and Middle Eastern passengers showed similar patterns. The room was silent. We also reviewed the language used in crew communications. Terms like high maintenance, questionable appearance, and doesn't fit the cabin. Profile appeared frequently in cases involving passengers of color. These terms were rarely, if ever, applied to white passengers. He paused. In short, the data supports what Mr. Shaw alleged. There was a systemic pattern of discrimination embedded in Vanguard's operational culture. Richard Hammond's face was ashen. Dr. Freeman clicked to the next slide. However, I want to be clear. This was not the result of explicit racial animus on the part of individual employees. Most crew members we interviewed genuinely believed they were following company policy and prioritizing customer service. The problem was that the policy itself was designed in a way that enabled unconscious bias to dictate outcomes. He looked directly at Hammond. The policy didn't say, remove black passengers. It said, manage the guest experience. But in practice, those 2 things became the same. Terrence leaned forward. What's your recommendation? Dr. Freeman nodded. Complete policy overhaul. Elimination of subjective language in crew training. Implementation of mandatory bias training with measurable outcomes. And most importantly, external oversight. A board that includes community representatives, civil rights experts, and affected passengers. We've already begun assembling that board, Patricia Nguyen said quickly. Good, Dr. Freeman replied. But words on paper won't fix this. You need structural change. You need accountability mechanisms. And you need to rebuild trust, which will take years. He closed his laptop. That's my assessment. Hammond thanked him, shook his hand, and waited until he left the room. Then he turned to Terrence. We're ready to move forward. With the deal. With the changes. All of it. Terrence studied him. I have conditions. Name them. First, I want quarterly reports on diversity metrics, not just hiring numbers. Passenger treatment, complaint resolution, reassignment patterns, all of it public and transparent. Agreed. Second, I want a seat on your board, not as a courtesy, as a full voting member with authority over policy decisions that impact passenger rights. Hammond hesitated, glanced at his attorneys. One of the board members, a woman named Margaret Chen, spoke up. We can make that happen. Third, Terrence continued, I want the compensation fund increased from $10 million to $25 million, and I want an independent administrator overseeing distribution. Patricia Nguyen opened her mouth to protest. Hammond stopped her with a look. Done. Terrence nodded slowly. Then we have a deal. He stood, extended his hand. Hammond shook it. And just like that, $95 million changed hands, along with something more valuable. Leverage. That night, Terrence called his mother. Dorothy Shaw was 81 now, still living in Memphis, still sharp as ever. Baby, I saw you on the news, she said, voice warm and proud. You did good. I did what you taught me, Mama. No, she corrected gently. You did what needed doing. I just showed you it was possible. Terrence smiled. I keep thinking about that day at Goldsmith's, the department store. You remember? Of course I remember. You didn't fight back. You just left. That's right. Why? Dorothy was quiet for a moment. Because that fight wasn't worth having. Not then. Not there. But you, baby. Her voice softened. Your fight was worth it. You had the power to make them listen. I didn't. That's the difference. Terrence felt his throat tighten. I'm tired, Mama. I know you are. But you can rest now. You did the hard part. Did I? Feels like I just started. Dorothy laughed softly. Oh, you've been fighting your whole life, Terrence. This is just the first time the world watched. They talked for another hour. About family. About Memphis. About nothing and everything. When he finally hung up, Terrence sat in the dark, staring at the city lights outside his window. Tomorrow, he'd sign the papers, finalize the deal, begin the work of holding Vanguard accountable. But tonight, he let himself feel what he'd been too busy to acknowledge. Pride. Not in the money, not in the headlines. In the fact that he'd taken a moment of humiliation and turned it into something that mattered. If you were in Terrence's position, facing this kind of injustice after a lifetime of having to be twice as good, how would you respond? Share your thoughts in the comments. 3 months later, the conference room at Vanguard Airline's headquarters looked different now. Not physically. Same glass walls, same leather chairs, same view of Boston's skyline. But the energy had shifted. There was a weight in the air that hadn't been there before. Accountability, maybe, or just awareness. Terrence sat at the table, not as a guest this time, but as a board member. His nameplate read, Terrence Shaw, Director, Passenger Rights and Equity Oversight. Around him sat the newly formed Diversity and Inclusion Committee, Margaret Chen, board member and corporate attorney, Dr. Marcus Freeman, the civil rights consultant who'd conducted the audit, Angela Martinez, who'd been promoted to Director of Employee Advocacy, and 3 community representatives, a civil rights attorney from Atlanta, an NAACP chapter president from Detroit, and a disability rights advocate from San Francisco. They met every month. Today's agenda: reviewing the first quarter's passenger reassignment data. Dr. Freeman pulled up a spreadsheet on the screen. Let's start with the numbers, he said. In the first quarter of implementation, we had 32 total passenger reassignments across all cabin classes. Down from what? Terrence asked. 74 in the same quarter last year. Margaret Chen nodded. That's progress. It is, Dr. Freeman agreed. But we need to look deeper. He clicked to the next slide. A breakdown by race. Of those 32 reassignments, 8 involved passengers of color. That's 25%. Compared to last year, when it was over 60%, this is a significant improvement. But passengers of color represent roughly 40% of Vanguard's customer base, which means they're still slightly underrepresented in reassignments. Underrepresented? The disability advocate, a woman named Sarah Kim, raised an eyebrow. You mean they're still being moved more often than they should be? Not statistically, Dr. Freeman clarified. The distribution is actually closer to what we'd expect in a truly random system. But I want to keep monitoring it. 1 quarter of data isn't enough to declare victory. Terrence scanned the spreadsheet. What were the stated reasons for reassignment? Angela pulled up her notes. Legitimate overbooking in 12 cases, verified through our new audit process. Aircraft maintenance issues requiring seat changes in 9 cases. Passenger medical emergencies in 4. And 7 cases, flagged for supervisory review. Tell me about those 7, Terrence said. Angela's expression tightened. 3 were approved, 4 were overturned. Overturned by whom? By me, she said quietly. I reviewed the crew's justification, interviewed the passengers involved, and determined the reassignments weren't warranted. Terrence looked at her. And the crew members involved? Retrained. 2 are on probation. 1 was terminated for repeated violations. The room fell quiet. Margaret Chen spoke up. That termination is already generating pushback. The union filed a grievance. Let them, Terrence said. If the crew member violated policy after receiving explicit training on bias awareness, that's grounds for termination. We can't send the message that this is optional. I agree, Dr. Freeman said. But we need to be prepared for legal challenges. This is going to get messy before it gets clean. Terrence nodded. He'd known this from the beginning. Real change didn't happen quietly. It happened with resistance, pushback, and people digging in their heels because comfort felt safer than accountability. But he wasn't here to make people comfortable. He was here to make sure no one else had to sit in row 29 after paying for seat 3A. The resistance came faster than expected. 2 weeks after the committee meeting, an anonymous letter circulated among Vanguard flight crews. Someone had scanned it and posted it on an internal employee forum. Subject: Enough is enough to all crew members who are tired of being treated like criminals. We are not racists. We are professionals. We have dedicated our careers to providing excellent service. But now, because of one incident involving 1 passenger, we are being monitored, retrained, and second-guessed at every turn. Mr. Shaw's experience was unfortunate. But that doesn't mean the entire airline is broken. The policies we followed were designed to prioritize passenger safety and satisfaction. If those policies were flawed, that's a management issue, not a crew issue. We should not be scapegoated for doing our jobs. It's time to stand up. It's time to demand that management stop treating us like the problem and start recognizing the real issue. Passengers who abuse the complaint system to get special treatment. Signed, concerned crew members. Angela forwarded the letter to Terrence with a single line. This is spreading fast. Terrence read it twice. Then he called Richard Hammond. We need to address this. I know, Hammond said, sounding weary. HR is already drafting a response. That's not enough. What do you suggest? A town hall. Let the crew members say what they're feeling. Let them ask questions. Let them see that this isn't about blaming them. It's about fixing a broken system they were forced to work within. Hammond hesitated. That could backfire. It could, Terrence agreed. But silence will definitely backfire. There was a pause. Fine. I'll set it up. The town hall took place in a hotel conference center near Boston Logan Airport. Over 300 flight attendants, gate agents, and customer service reps filled the room. The energy was tense, defensive, angry. Terrence sat on a panel at the front alongside Richard Hammond, Angela Martinez, and Dr. Freeman. Hammond opened with prepared remarks, thanking the crew, acknowledging the difficulty of the transition, reiterating the company's commitment to both passenger rights and employee support. It was polite, professional, and no one believed a word of it. When he opened the floor for questions, hands shot up immediately. A flight attendant in the third row stood. I've been with this airline for 12 years. I've never once treated a passenger differently because of their race. But now I'm being told I need bias training like I'm some kind of bigot. How is that fair? Terrence leaned forward. Can I respond to that? The woman nodded, arms crossed. You're right, Terrence said. You probably haven't consciously treated passengers differently. Most people don't. But bias isn't always conscious. It's the assumptions we make without thinking. The passenger who looks suspicious versus the one who looks trustworthy. The name we can't pronounce versus the one that sounds familiar. These aren't personal failings. They're human patterns. But when those patterns get embedded in policy, they become systemic discrimination. He paused. The training isn't calling you a bigot. It's asking you to notice the patterns. That's all. The woman sat down, expression unreadable. Another hand went up, a man in the back. What about passengers who file complaints just to get free stuff? We all know it happens. Are we supposed to just ignore that? Angela answered this time. No. But there's a difference between a passenger gaming the system and a passenger raising a legitimate concern. Our job is to distinguish between the two. And if we're honest, we haven't always done that well. That's easy to say when you're not the one getting yelled at by a passenger who thinks they deserve special treatment, the man shot back. You're right, Angela said. It's not easy. I know, because I've been there. I've been the flight attendant caught between policy and people. And I'm telling you, the system we had was setting us up to fail. We were being asked to make judgment calls without clear guidelines. And when things went wrong, we were the ones who took the blame. The room shifted slightly. A woman in the middle raised her hand. So what's different now? Dr. Freeman spoke up. Clear protocols, objective criteria, oversight. If you have to reassign a passenger, you follow a checklist. If there's any ambiguity, it gets escalated. You're not alone in making those decisions anymore. And if we disagree with the decision from above, someone asked, then you report it, Terrence said. Anonymously if you need to. That's what the new whistleblower protection policy is for. If you see something that doesn't feel right, you say something. No retaliation, no punishment, just accountability. There was silence. Then, a younger flight attendant stood. Her voice was shaky. I was on Flight 412, the one where Mr. Shaw was removed. The room turned to her. I didn't do anything, she continued. I just watched. I knew it felt wrong, but I didn't speak up because I didn't think it was my place. And I've regretted it every day since. Her eyes met Terrence's. I'm sorry. Terrence held her gaze. Thank you. But you don't owe me an apology. You were put in an impossible situation. The system failed you as much as it failed me. The young woman nodded, tears in her eyes, and sat down. The energy in the room had shifted again. Less defensive, more reflective. Richard Hammond stood. I know this is hard. Change always is. But I want to be clear. We are not going back to the way things were. We are moving forward, and I need you with us, not because I'm ordering you to comply, but because you believe in what we're doing." He looked around the room. "If you have concerns, voice them. If you have ideas, share them. This is your airline, too. Let's build something better together." The applause was hesitant at first, then louder, not universal, not enthusiastic, but it was a start. That night, Terrence sat in his hotel room, exhausted. His phone buzzed. A text from Janelle. Saw the footage from the town hall. "You handled that beautifully." He smiled faintly. Didn't feel beautiful. Felt like walking a tightrope. "That's leadership, boss. You're changing hearts, not just policies." Terrence stared at the message. Was he? He wasn't sure. Some people in that room still thought he was the problem. Some probably always would. But a few, maybe more than a few, had started to see things differently. And maybe that was enough. Another text came through. This one from a number he didn't recognize. "Mr. Shaw, this is the flight attendant who spoke at the town hall today. I just wanted to say thank you for not making me feel like a villain. I've been so ashamed. But hearing you say the system failed both of us, it helped. I hope I can do better going forward." Terrence read it 3 times. Then he typed back, "You already are. Thank you for your courage." He set the phone down, looked out at the city, and for the first time in months he felt like the weight on his shoulders had lightened. Just a little. What would you do if you witnessed something like Terrence did on Flight 412? Would you stay silent or speak up? I'd love to know your answer in the comments below. 6 months after the town hall, the story reached national television. 60 Minutes called. They wanted to do a full segment. Flying While Black. Inside the culture of discrimination at 30,000 feet. The producer, a woman named Rachel Kim, reached out to Terrence directly. "We want to tell the whole story, not just what happened to you, but the pattern, the system, the people affected." Terrence hesitated. He'd already done interviews. The New York Times, the Washington Post, NPR, CNN. But 60 Minutes was different. 60 Minutes meant millions of viewers. It meant scrutiny at a level he wasn't sure he was ready for. "I need to think about it," he told Rachel. "Take your time," she said. "But I should tell you, we're moving forward with or without you. We've already interviewed 12 other passengers who were removed from premium cabins. Your story is the catalyst, but it's not the only one." Terrence closed his eyes. 12 other passengers. People whose names he didn't know, whose faces he'd never seen, but whose experiences mirrored his own. "Who are they?" he asked. Rachel paused. "I can't share details yet, but I can tell you they're from all over the country. Different airlines, different circumstances, but the same underlying issue. This isn't just Vanguard." "No," Rachel said quietly. "It's industry-wide." Terrence sat with that for a long moment. Then he made his decision. "I'll do it on one condition. Name it. I want you to interview Angela Martinez, the flight attendant who brought me the evidence. She risked her career to do the right thing. People need to hear her story, too." Done. The segment aired on a Sunday night in March. Terrence watched from his office in Atlanta, laptop open, phone silenced. The opening shot was footage of an airport terminal. People rushing, planes taking off. The narrator's voice, calm and deliberate, laid out the premise. Every day, millions of Americans board flights trusting that they'll be treated fairly. But for some passengers, that trust is misplaced. Tonight, we investigate a pattern of discrimination that spans the airline industry and the people fighting to change it. Cut to Terrence sitting in a chair in his office. Tailored suit, calm expression. Wasn't angry when it happened, he said on camera. I was tired of having to prove I belonged, tired of being questioned, tired of being treated like an anomaly in spaces I'd earned the right to occupy. The camera pulled back. But anger came later, when I realized it wasn't just me. Cut to another passenger. A woman named Sharon Bell, mid-50s, elegantly dressed. "I was flying from Chicago to Miami," she said. "Business class. I'd been upgraded using miles. A white couple boarded late and complained there weren't 2 seats together. The gate agent asked me to move to accommodate them. I said no. They called security." Her voice cracked. "I was escorted off the plane in handcuffs." Cut to a younger man. Jamal Porter, late 20s, software engineer. "I was wearing a hoodie and jeans, flying first class to San Francisco for a tech conference. The flight attendant asked to see my boarding pass 3 times. Then she asked if I was sure I was in the right cabin. Showed her my ticket, my ID, my conference badge. She still made me wait while she verified my seat assignment." He shook his head. "The guy next to me was wearing sweatpants and a stained t-shirt. Nobody asked him anything." The segment went on. Story after story. Different airlines, different cities, same pattern. Then it cut to Angela Martinez. She sat in front of a neutral background, hands folded, eyes steady but vulnerable. "I became a flight attendant because I love people," she said. "I love making travel easier, safer, more comfortable. But over time, I started to notice things that didn't sit right. Passengers being moved, questioned, treated differently. And when I asked why, I was told it was policy." She paused. "But policy is just a word we use to avoid accountability." The camera stayed on her face. "I knew if I spoke up, I could lose everything. My job, my benefits, my reputation. But I also knew that staying silent made me complicit. And I couldn't live with that." Cut back to the narrator. Angela Martinez provided internal documents to Terrence Shaw. Documents that revealed a systematic pattern of racial profiling embedded in airline policies across the industry. The screen filled with redacted memos, spreadsheets, email chains. The narrator walked through the evidence methodically, clinically damning. Then the segment shifted to Vanguard's response. Footage of Richard Hammond's press conference, his apology, the policy changes. But the narrator didn't let it end there. While Vanguard has taken steps to address the issue, critics argue the changes don't go far enough, and other airlines have been slower to respond. Cut to Dr. Marcus Freeman. "This isn't about one company or one policy," he said. "It's about a culture that has normalized bias. Airlines have built entire systems around assumptions about who belongs in premium spaces. And those assumptions are rooted in race, class, and perceived status." He leaned forward. "The question isn't whether discrimination exists. The data makes that clear. The question is whether the industry is willing to dismantle the structures that enable it." The segment ended with Terrence back in his office, looking directly at the camera. "I didn't do this for revenge," he said. "I did it because I'm tired of being the exception. I'm tired of being the black executive who gets profiled, the Harvard graduate who gets questioned, the CEO who gets moved to row 29. His voice was calm, steady. "I want a world where my nephew can fly first class without being interrogated, where my niece can board a plane without being assumed to be in the wrong seat, where nobody has to be twice as qualified just to be treated with basic dignity." He paused. "That's not radical. That's just right." The screen faded to black. The response was immediate. Within an hour, #FlyingWhileBlack was trending on Twitter. Within 2 hours, 3 major airlines issued statements promising to review their policies. Within 24 hours, the Department of Transportation announced an investigation into passenger discrimination practices across the industry. Terrence's phone didn't stop ringing. Journalists, lawyers, advocacy groups, other passengers who wanted to share their stories, airlines scrambling to get ahead of the narrative. He ignored most of them. But he answered one call. It was from a woman named Brenda Hughes. She worked for the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. "Mr. Shaw, we'd like to file a class action lawsuit on behalf of passengers who were wrongfully removed from flights. Would you be willing to serve as a lead plaintiff?" Terrence leaned back in his chair. A lawsuit. It would mean years of legal battles, depositions, cross-examinations, public scrutiny. But it would also mean accountability on a scale that no press conference or policy change could deliver. Yes, he said. I'm in. The lawsuit was filed 3 weeks later. Hughes, v. Vanguard Airlines, et al. The complaint named 6 major airlines. It alleged systematic racial discrimination in passenger treatment, citing the internal documents Angela had provided, the audit results Dr. Freeman had compiled, and testimony from over 200 affected passengers. The airlines fought back hard. They hired the best law firms money could buy. They argued that the reassignments were isolated incidents, not systemic patterns. They claimed the policies were designed to enhance customer service, not discriminate. But the evidence was overwhelming. Email chains where crew members used coded language, urban, non-traditional, doesn't fit the profile, to describe passengers of color. Training materials that emphasized maintaining cabin aesthetics without defining what that meant. Data showing that black passengers were removed from premium cabins at rates 3 to 4 times higher than white passengers with identical booking profiles. The case went to trial 18 months later. Terrence sat at the plaintiff's table, flanked by Brenda Hughes and 3 other passengers who joined the suit. Across the aisle, lawyers in expensive suits shuffled papers and whispered to each other. The trial lasted 6 weeks. Witnesses testified. Experts analyzed data. Passengers shared their stories. And then, on a Friday afternoon in November, the jury came back. Verdict: in favor of the plaintiffs. Damages: $340 million split among the affected passengers. Injunction: all defendant airlines must implement independent oversight boards, eliminate subjective reassignment policies, and submit to annual civil rights audits for the next 10 years. The courtroom erupted. Terrence sat perfectly still. He didn't smile, didn't celebrate. He just closed his eyes and breathed. That night, he called his mother again. "We won, Mama." Dorothy Shaw's voice was warm, proud. "I knew you would. It doesn't feel like I thought it would." "What do you mean?" "I thought I'd feel, I don't know, triumphant, but I just feel tired." "That's because you've been carrying something heavy for a long time, baby. And now you can finally put it down." Terrence nodded, even though she couldn't see him. "You know what the hardest part was?" "What?" "Realizing that even after all this, the lawsuits, the policy changes, the media coverage, some people still don't think it was a big deal. They think I'm making a mountain out of a molehill, that I should have just taken the voucher and moved on." Dorothy was quiet for a moment. "Let me tell you something," she finally said. "When I was your age, I worked as a maid in a hotel downtown. White hotel. White guests. White management. One day, a guest complained that I'd stolen her jewelry. Turns out she'd just misplaced it. But they searched my locker anyway. Made me empty my purse in front of everybody. And when they didn't find anything, nobody apologized. They just told me to get back, to work." She paused. "I could have made a fuss, could have demanded an apology, but I didn't. You know why?" "Why?" "Because I needed the job. Because I didn't have power, because I knew if I fought back, I'd lose everything." Her voice softened. "But you, Terrence, you have power. You have a voice. You have resources. And you use them to fight a battle I couldn't. So don't you dare let anybody tell you it wasn't a big deal. Because to me, and to every person who's been where you've been, It's the biggest deal in the world. Terrence felt tears sting his eyes. Thank you, Mama. You don't need to thank me, baby. Just keep going. Keep fighting. Keep making space for the next person. They talked for another hour, and when he finally hung up, Terrence felt something shift inside him. Not relief, exactly, but purpose. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. 2 years after the verdict. Terrence stood in the lobby of Vanguard Airline's headquarters. Not as a plaintiff, not as an adversary, but as a board member walking into his quarterly oversight meeting. The receptionist smiled when she saw him. A genuine smile, not the tight, rehearsed one he'd gotten 2 years ago. Good morning, Mr. Shaw. The boardroom is ready for you. Thank you, Lisa. He took the elevator to the 38th floor. The doors opened to reveal a different kind of meeting space than he'd first encountered. The walls now displayed photos, real photos, of Vanguard's diverse workforce, flight attendants from different backgrounds, gate agents of all ages and ethnicities, pilots who didn't all look like they'd stepped out of the same catalog. The boardroom itself had changed too. New faces around the table, more women, more people of color, more representation that actually reflected the passengers they served. Margaret Chen was already seated. She nodded when Terrence entered. Morning, Terrence. Morning, Margaret. Dr. Freeman arrived next, followed by Angela Martinez, who now held the title of Vice President of Diversity and Passenger Advocacy. She'd been promoted twice in 2 years. Not because of publicity, but because she'd proven herself indispensable. The new CEO, Sandra Mitchell, appointed after Richard Hammond's retirement, entered last. Sandra was different from Hammond, younger, sharper, more willing to admit when the company had screwed up. She'd been with Vanguard for 15 years, working her way up from regional manager. She knew the culture, and she knew it needed to change. Let's get started, Sandra said, taking her seat. Terrence, you want to lead us through the quarterly report? Terrence pulled up the slides on his laptop. First, passenger reassignment data. This quarter, we had 18 reassignments across all cabin classes, down from 22 last quarter. Of those 18, 4 involved passengers of color. That's 22%, which is below the demographic baseline of our customer base. Click to the next slide. All 18 reassignments were reviewed by Angela's team. 15 were approved as legitimate, mechanical issues, medical emergencies, verifiable overbooking. 3 were overturned and resulted in crew retraining. Any patterns in the overturned cases? Margaret asked. Angela answered. 2 involved gate agents who had previous flags in their records for similar judgment calls. They've been placed on final warning. The third was a newer employee who misunderstood protocol. She's been reassigned to ground duties temporarily while she completes additional training. Sandra nodded. Good. What about passenger complaints? Terrence switched slides. We received 43 formal complaints this quarter related to perceived discrimination or unfair treatment. That's up from 38 last quarter. Sandra frowned. Up? Yes, but that's not necessarily bad. We've made it easier for passengers to file complaints. We've advertised the process more, visibly. And we've built trust that complaints will actually be investigated. So an increase in reports could mean passengers feel more comfortable speaking up. Dr. Freeman leaned forward. I'd agree with that assessment. In our passenger surveys, 72% of respondents said they trust Vanguard to handle discrimination complaints fairly. That's up from 31% 2 years ago. Still, Sandra said, 43 complaints is 43 too many. Absolutely, Terrence agreed. Which is why we're implementing the new real-time flagging system next month. If a passenger feels they've been treated unfairly, they can report it immediately via the app. The complaint goes directly to Angela's team, bypassing local management. We respond within 24 hours. Angela nodded. We've been piloting it on select routes. So far, response has been positive. Passengers appreciate the immediacy, and crew members appreciate having a clear escalation path when they're unsure how to handle a situation. The meeting continued for another hour. Budget allocations for diversity training, updates on the compensation fund distribution, plans for expanding the oversight model to Aurora Aviation, the subsidiary Terrence's firm had invested in. It was detailed, technical, unglamorous, but it was working. When the meeting ended, Sandra asked Terrence to stay behind. "Can we talk for a minute?" "Of course." They sat back down. The room was quiet now, just the two of them and the hum of the building's ventilation system. "I wanted to ask you something," Sandra said. "Off the record." "Okay. Do you trust us yet?" Terrence considered the question. "That's complicated." "I figured." "I trust that you're trying," Terrence said carefully. "I trust that the systems we've built are better than what was here before. But trust isn't just about policies. It's about culture, and culture takes time to change." Sandra nodded. "I know, but we're trying, every day. I know you are, and that matters." She looked at him. "Can I ask you another question?" "Sure." "Why are you still here? You won the lawsuit. You got the policy changes. You could have walked away 2 years ago with your victory and your $95 million. So why keep showing up?" Terrence leaned back in his chair. "Because walking away would have sent a message that this was just about me, about my seat, my experience. But it's not. It's about every passenger who's been questioned, doubted, removed. It's about the flight attendant who spoke up and the one who stayed silent. It's about making sure the changes stick." He paused. "And because I made a promise." "To who?" "To myself, to my mother, to every kid who looks like I did at 16 and wonders if they'll ever be allowed to just exist, without having to prove themselves." Sandra was quiet for a long moment. "For what it's worth," she finally said, "I'm glad you stayed. So am I." That evening, Terrence flew home to Atlanta. First class, seat 2C. When he boarded, the flight attendant greeted him warmly. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Shaw." No hesitation, no request for his boarding pass, no second guessing, just welcome. He settled into his seat, pulled out his laptop, and opened his email. There was a message from a name he didn't recognize. Subject: "Thank you, dear Mr. Shaw. My name is Marcus Thompson. I'm a 17-year-old high school student from Detroit. Last month, I flew to Washington, D.C. for a scholarship competition. I booked a first-class ticket with money I'd saved from working part-time. When I boarded, the flight attendant asked to see my boarding pass 3 times. I was nervous. I thought maybe I'd done something wrong. But then I remembered your story. I remembered what you said on 60 Minutes about not shrinking. So I stood my ground, politely, calmly, and eventually she let me sit down. I won the scholarship competition. Full ride to Howard University. I'm writing to say thank you, not just for fighting for yourself, but for fighting for people like me. People who need to see that it's possible to challenge systems without losing who we are. I don't know if I'll ever meet you, but I wanted you to know that your story mattered. It still matters." Respectfully, Marcus Thompson Terrence read the email 3 times. Then he closed his laptop and looked out the window as the plane lifted into the sky. Below him, the city lights spread like scattered stars. Millions of people living their lives, flying their flights, navigating systems that sometimes worked and sometimes didn't. He thought about Marcus, about his mother, about Angela and Claire, and every person who'd been caught between doing what was right and doing what was safe. He thought about the lawsuit, the policies, the board meetings, the endless hours of work. And he realized something. This wasn't about winning. It was about opening doors, so that the next Marcus Thompson wouldn't have to stand his ground 3 times, so that the next Angela Martinez wouldn't have to risk her career to speak the truth, so that the next person who looked like him could board a plane and just fly. Without question, without doubt, without having to prove they belonged. That was the goal. And for the first time in 2 years, Terrence felt like it might actually be possible. 3 weeks later, Terrence received an invitation. The Congressional Black Caucus wanted to honor him at their annual gala in Washington, D.C. They were giving him an award for civil rights advocacy. He almost declined. He didn't need recognition, didn't want the spotlight. The work itself was enough. But Janelle convinced him otherwise. Boss, this isn't about you. It's about the movement. People need to see that fighting back works, that change is possible. Go, accept the award, and use the platform to push for more. So he went. The gala was held at a historic hotel in downtown D.C. Elegant, formal, filled with politicians, activists, celebrities, and journalists. Terrence wore a custom-tailored tuxedo. He sat at a table with Angela, Dr. Freeman, and several of the other passengers from the lawsuit. When his name was called, he walked to the stage. The applause was thunderous. He stood at the podium, looking out at hundreds of faces. People who'd fought their own battles, who'd challenged their own systems, who'd refused to accept that injustice was inevitable. He didn't have prepared remarks. He just spoke. 2 years ago, I was removed from a first-class seat on a flight from Denver to Boston. It wasn't the first time I'd been questioned. It wasn't the first time I'd been treated like I didn't belong. But it was the first time I decided I wasn't going to let it go. He paused. I didn't know what would happen. I didn't know if anyone would care. But I knew I couldn't stay silent. The room was perfectly quiet. Since then, I've learned something important. Change doesn't happen because one person fights back. It happens because that one person inspires others to fight too. It happens because flight attendants like Angela Martinez risk their jobs to tell the truth. Because lawyers like Brenda Hughes build cases that hold systems accountable. Because passengers like Sharon Bell and Jamal Porter refuse to be erased. He looked at the audience. This award isn't mine. It belongs to every person who's ever been told they don't belong and refuse to believe it. It belongs to the parents who teach their children to stand tall even when the world tries to make them small. It belongs to the next generation, who won't have to fight the battles we're fighting now because we refuse to leave the systems broken. His voice softened. I'm honored to be here, but I'm not done. None of us are. Because as long as there are people being removed from seats they paid for, questioned for names they were given, doubted for skin they were born in, this work continues. He stepped back from the podium. The applause was deafening, but what stayed with him wasn't the noise. It was the faces, young people, old people, people who'd been through their own versions of Flight 412, people who saw themselves in his story. And that, more than any lawsuit or policy change, felt like progress. 5 years after Flight 412. Terrence Shaw stood in the same terminal where this had all begun. Denver International Airport, early evening. The concourse buzzed with travelers, business people in suits, families with strollers, college students with backpacks slung over their shoulders. He was here for a different reason this time. Vanguard Airlines had invited him to speak at the opening ceremony for their new Passenger Rights Education Center, a permanent installation in the airport designed to educate travelers about their rights, provide resources for filing complaints, and showcase the history of civil rights, activism in air travel. It was Angela's idea. She'd pitched it to the board 6 months ago. They'd approved it unanimously. Terrence walked through the center slowly. The walls were lined with exhibits, photos of the Freedom Riders who challenged segregation on buses and planes in the 1960s, stories of Japanese Americans forced into internment camps and later discriminated against during air travel, accounts of Muslim passengers profiled after 9/11, and in the center of the room, a newer exhibit. One seat, one stand, the story of Flight 412. There were photos from the trial, copies of the internal documents Angela had leaked, video clips from the 60 Minutes segment, and a timeline showing the policy changes that had resulted from the lawsuit. But what caught Terrence's eye was something smaller, a letter framed and mounted on the wall. It was from Marcus Thompson, the high school student who'd emailed him 2 years ago. The letter described Marcus's experience flying to his scholarship competition, his nervousness, his decision to stand his ground, his gratitude. Below it, a photo. Marcus in a Howard University sweatshirt, smiling, holding his acceptance letter. Terrence stared at the image for a long time. This was why it mattered. Not the lawsuit, not the settlement, not the headlines, but this. A kid who'd learned he didn't have to shrink, who'd seen someone who looked like him fight back and win, who'd carried that lesson into his own life. "Mr. Shaw?" Terrence turned. A young woman stood behind him, mid-20s, wearing a Vanguard Airlines uniform. Her name tag read Jasmine Carter. "Yes? I just wanted to introduce myself. I'm one of the new flight attendants. I started 6 months ago, and I wanted to thank you." Terrence smiled. "Thank me for what?" "For making it possible for me to do this job the right way. The training I went through, it's different now. We learn about bias, about treating every passenger with dignity, about how to recognize when we're making assumptions instead of following facts." She paused. "My mom's black. My dad's white. I've been on both sides of these kinds of situations my whole life. And I always wondered if I could be a flight attendant without having to choose which part of myself to bring to work. Because of what you did, I don't have to choose. I can just be." Terrence felt something tighten in his chest. "That means more than you know," he said quietly. Jasmine nodded. "I just wanted you to hear it, from someone who's living the change you fought for." She smiled, then walked away. Terrence stood there, watching her disappear into the crowd. The ceremony began an hour later. The terminal's main hall had been transformed. Rows of chairs, a small stage, a podium with the Vanguard Airlines logo beside the new Passenger Rights Education Center logo, a pair of wings opening toward a horizon. Sandra Mitchell spoke first, outlining the center's mission and thanking the people who'd made it possible. Then Angela took the stage. "5 years ago, I made a choice that terrified me," she said, voice steady. "I chose to tell the truth, even though I knew it could cost me everything. And standing here today, I can say it was the hardest and best decision I've ever made." She looked out at the audience. "This center exists because people refused to stay silent, because passengers like Terrence Shaw demanded accountability, because employees like me decided our jobs weren't worth protecting systems that harm people, and because leaders like Sandra were willing to admit when something was broken and commit to fixing it." She paused. "Change is hard. It's uncomfortable. It's slow. But it's possible. And this center is proof." The applause was warm, sustained. Then it was Terrence's turn. He walked to the podium, adjusted the microphone, and looked out at the crowd. He saw familiar faces. Angela, Dr. Freeman, Janelle, Margaret Chen, Sharon Bell, the woman who'd been escorted off her flight in handcuffs, Jamal Porter, the software engineer who'd been questioned for wearing a hoodie, and new faces, flight attendants, gate agents, passengers who'd never experienced discrimination but wanted to understand. "I don't have a speech prepared," Terrence said. Because I think the exhibits in this center speak louder than anything I could say. He gestured toward the displays. What happened to me wasn't unique. It was part of a pattern that's existed for decades. A pattern that says some people belong in certain spaces and others don't. A pattern built on assumptions, biases, and systems that prioritize comfort over justice. He paused. But here's what I've learned over the past 5 years. Patterns can be broken, systems can be changed, and silence can be replaced with action. His voice softened. I didn't fight back because I thought I'd win. I fought back because staying silent felt like betraying every person who'd been through what I'd been through and didn't have the resources to challenge it. I fought back because my mother taught me that fairness and reality don't always shake hands. But that doesn't mean we stop reaching for fairness. He looked directly at the camera recording the ceremony. If you're watching this and you've ever been removed from a seat you paid for, questioned for a name that doesn't sound familiar, doubted because of how you look, I want you to know something. You're not imagining it. You're not being sensitive. You're not making it up. And you don't have to accept it. His voice steadied. File the complaint. Document the incident. Share your story. Because every time we stay silent, we give permission for the pattern to continue. And every time we speak up, we create space for the next person to do the same. He stepped back from the podium. The applause started quietly, then grew. People stood. And as Terrence looked out at the room, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Not because the work was done, but because it was moving forward. After the ceremony, Terrence walked back to the gate where he'd boarded Flight 412 5 years ago. Gate C-38. He stood there, watching passengers board a different flight. Families, business travelers, people just trying to get where they were going. Nobody looked twice at him. Nobody questioned whether he belonged. He was just another passenger, and that, in itself, felt like victory. His phone buzzed. A text from his mother. Watch the ceremony online. So proud of you, baby. Your daddy would be, too. Terrence smiled, typed back. Thanks, Mama. Love you. He slipped the phone into his pocket and headed toward his own gate. First class. Seat 4A. When he boarded, the flight attendant smiled. Good evening, Mr. Shaw. Welcome aboard. No hesitation, no questions, just welcome. Terrence settled into his seat, pulled out a book, and let himself relax outside. The window, the sun was setting. The sky had turned shades of amber and rose, the kind of light that made everything look softer, gentler. The plane pushed back from the gate. The engines hummed to life. And as they lifted into the sky, Terrence thought about the journey, not just this flight, but the whole 5 years. The humiliation in row 29, the anger that followed, the decision to fight back, the lawsuit, the policy changes, the resistance, the slow, painful progress, and finally, the moments like today. The students who emailed, the flight attendants who thanked him, the centers that would educate future generations. He'd started this because he was tired of being treated like he didn't belong. He'd continued it because he realized belonging wasn't something you earned. It was something you claimed. For yourself, for others, for everyone who came after. The plane climbed higher, and Terrence Shaw, CEO, board member, plaintiff, advocate, son, mentor, and human being, closed his eyes and let himself rest. The work would continue tomorrow. But tonight, he'd done enough. Epilogue. 10 years after Flight 412, Vanguard Airlines released its annual diversity report. Passenger reassignments in premium cabins, down 92% from 2025 levels. Discrimination complaints, down 87%. Employee satisfaction among flight crews regarding bias training, 79% approval. Passenger trust and fair treatment, 84% confidence rating. The numbers weren't perfect, but they were better. And better, Terrence had learned, was how change happened. Not all at once, not with a single lawsuit or policy, but slowly, steadily, through the collective efforts of people who refused to accept that injustice was inevitable. The Passenger Rights Education Center in Denver expanded to 12 other airports across the country. Angela Martinez became Senior Vice President of Equity and Passenger Advocacy, overseeing programs at multiple airlines. Dr. Marcus Freeman published a book on systemic bias in corporate America, using the airline industry as a case study. And Terrence Shaw continued showing up, to board meetings, to speaking engagements, to courtrooms when necessary, because the work was never finished, but it was moving forward, and that was enough. If Terrence's story moved you, if it made you think about the systems we navigate every day and the courage it takes to challenge them, I'd love to hear from you. Take a moment to share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever experienced something similar? Have you witnessed it happen to someone else? What part of this story hit hardest for you? And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, hit that subscribe button for Justice Stories. Give this video a like. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, because these stories matter. These voices matter. And the more we share them, the harder it becomes for systems to stay broken. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. And thank you for being part of the conversation. This is Justice Stories, where every voice counts, every story matters, and every stand for justice echoes forward. See you in the next one.